Back again.
Did we ever decide who's Tweedledee and who's Tweedledum?
I thought I was Jeff and you were Mutt.
I'm Mutt, yep. Welcome everybody to PCI Community Meeting this year. I'm Jeff, this is Jeff. As we were introduced, I'm a QSA from Online Business Systems, recently rebranded as OBS Global. Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Jeff Zitomer, I lead our product for client-side defense at Human Security.
Hey, we're here to talk 643-1161, everybody's favorite topic last year, this year, the year before. This is a little overview of what we're trying to cover. Essentially, we're going to try to synthesize a little bit how you actually meet the requirements. Try to provide a little bit of meat and context to the guidance document that's already been put out. Real quickly, by now, if you don't know what 643 and 1161 are about, you must have been living under a rock. That was a joke, right? Okay. Why is it important? You've probably heard some of these stories. You know, we have references from the Verizon data breach report. I actually did a talk a couple months ago on sort of the history of PCI, and I used the Verizon data breach reports as a sort of a reference item for my research. These reports go back to 2008, and the first report that came out was actually a compilation of 5 years of data. So it goes back to 2004. Coincidentally, that's when the first version of the PCI standard was released, 1.0. So in that first Verizon data breach report back in 2008, anybody want to take a wild guess as what the number one type of data was that was being stolen? Shout it out. Credit cards, PAN. It was all over the place. Fast forward a few years, and those numbers have gone down. The 2025 report just came out a couple weeks ago. I've only had a chance to glance through it, but I did read through it enough to see that these web skimming attacks, which is what 643 and 1161 are supposed to be helping to address, they relate to web skimming attacks, more commonly known as MageCart. MageCart is still in the 2025 report. The good news is payment breaches, payment card theft as a whole item in terms of all the breaches that they're reporting, it's only about 1%. But of that 1%, 80% of those payment-related breaches are web skimming, MageCart types attacks. So that's why we keep talking about this information. You know, we've had a long timeline, we've had a runway to get up to here, but the future is now. We're doing this. Don't want to focus so much on who needs to do it, although we'll touch on that a little bit. But it's really getting into the nuts and bolts of how you do this. That's where I'm going to let Jeff talk in just a moment. I'm trying to bring the QSA perspective because I'm working with clients now that are trying to meet these requirements. A brief word, SAQ A comes up a lot. Most of my clients are large merchants where they're using SAQ A as a guide to how do they address the security of their e-commerce sites. We all know that there's a kind of a twist to SAQ A. These requirements are gone now, but there is that eligibility requirement that essentially says you need to be doing these requirements. To me, as a 40-plus year security professional and been doing PCI forever, as long as it's been around, I think the important thing to stress is you have an e-commerce site, you have a website, you want to protect the security of that site. It's the right thing to do. If you're not completely 100% responsible for it because of the SAQ or because of outsourcing to third parties, at least try to track down who's doing it for you. That's one of the complexities that I'm dealing with my clients right now, is how to make sure that the requirements are being covered and making sure that the third parties are actually doing what they say they're doing with the whole AOC process and so on and so forth. So that's kind of it at a high level as a preview. Let me turn it over to Jeff, who'll actually tell you what to do.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
So yeah, a little bit going back to our talk from last year, and I'll come back to that a little bit in the end. how the site is architected impacts a lot of what you have in scope, how secure your site is, etc. We're going to run through a few of these really quickly, a few of these examples of architectures and types, and try to understand what that implies and where it is roughly on the security spectrum. So first off, if the payment fields on the website are fully merchant hosted, then obviously you wouldn't qualify for SAQ A, but also think about it as literally everything on that browser page is the same trust environment. So every single script on there can read credit card information at leisure on top of whatever other JavaScript attacks are possible. So effectively, for sure, all in scope, and there's a lot of work to do, and it's very important work because the risk is pretty high. Moving on to the next pattern, one of the most typical patterns that we see is the website is merchant.com, but the actual either payment form or each field individually is inside an iframe that comes directly from a payment service provider. In this case, separate trust environments, but in many cases, details matter. So not all iframes are necessarily secure or implemented securely. There can be more secure ones or less secure ones, depending on the attributes. And very importantly, if the iframe is established by JavaScript versus by a tag in the HTML, then the JavaScript is also more susceptible to an attack. So if you're trying to determine, for example, for SAQ A, how susceptible is my site for that eligibility criteria, just deploying an iframe in any case is not enough, but especially if that iframe is created by a JavaScript, then it's even less likely that your site is not susceptible, and you should be thinking about additional controls. Moving out, so even further, distancing yourself even further from payment data is the redirect. In this case as well, the details kind of matter. So if the redirect mechanism is a JavaScript, then again, other JavaScript on the page can tamper with that JavaScript. If it's a static link as part of the HTML, then again, a lot safer. And so I think when the eligibility criteria, I think one of the FAQs explicitly says that for redirect, you don't have to consider that eligibility criteria. But then if you are doing the full PCI, then also the supplemental guidelines for e-commerce do highlight that specifically that script that creates the redirect for sure is in scope, meaning that whole page that script is on is in scope as well. Mm-hmm. Let's keep going. Fully outsourced. So some people I've heard confuse this with like, oh, I have an iframe, so it's full. The payment part is fully outsourced. No, the idea here is that like the operation, the whole website is fully outsourced, or it's I send somebody an email with like a click to invoice to pay, and then they just go directly to the payment service provider from there and check out over there. That's what fits in the fully outsourced, and that means really the merchant in this case has no scope on the website itself. Of course, AOCs and working with the right PSP, of course.
If I can jump in real quick, that's a very common scenario that I see as an assessor, where I have a merchant that has a website, an e-commerce site, but they're not hosting it, they don't develop it, they don't have, they're obviously not the payment processor. That's all outsourced to various players. What I try to explain to them is, well, you're still the merchant that's filling out either the ROC or the SAQ. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but counsel, but you're the one that's signing off on the SAQ. It's up to you to make sure you know that any particular third-party service provider is doing the things like you're describing, even though it's technically not the merchant's responsibility, it is the responsibility of the contractors, the third parties that they've hired. And you'll find that information in the copy of the AOC you receive from those third-party service providers. The first place I look is in the list of things that have been listed as not applicable. Also, hopefully you have that shared responsibilities matrix of some form that you can use to address. To me, it's important to make sure that the site's secure, so you want to connect the dots and make sure somebody's doing it. I'll let you continue, Jeff.
Absolutely. Thanks for expanding on that. And here's where we connect. So this was probably one of the most important slides summarizing our talk from last year. So if until now we talked about sort of the pattern between you and the payment service provider, the part you may want to go back and watch our talk from last year. If it's not on the council's site, I'm pretty sure it's still on the human security site. especially single-page applications, when you think about, okay, what is that even parent page that hosts an iframe with the payment page? If you have a single-page application, that parent page is actually your whole app, because it's a single-page application. Every script loaded throughout the user's journey, which is what you're looking at here on the right, every script loaded throughout the journey is still going to be there at the time of checkout, and it's still there in that trusted environment that could potentially, in various ways, steal account data. And so, again, thinking about the susceptible, not susceptible, if you have that single page app, I think it's a lot harder to demonstrate how you're not susceptible with literally hundreds of scripts running there next to that iframe. If you have a multi-page app, or at least broke out that last step before the checkout page, to have that load as a separate real page, then that cleans out all previous scripts. And so if you controlled how many scripts are loaded on that last page, hopefully there are far few of them, and then of course it's going to be a lower bar to cross to be able to show that you're not susceptible, your site isn't susceptible to script-based attacks. So yeah, just switching gears a little bit from architecture to just more in general. Hopefully at this point, most merchants already have something out there deployed as a solution. They're already managing scripts. They know what they have authorizations. But now is a good time, maybe prepping for your first audit still, or after passing your first assessment, where you can think about, how do I improve it? How do I get more of the security benefit versus just checking the box? Or how do I just make this whole team sport of getting all my scripts secure? Just improve the efficiency of all of that, and use some best practices so that it's easy for the whole org to get the business value while reducing the risk and demonstrating that you're doing what you're supposed to for PCI.
And as a QSA, members of my team, our QSA team, going through with our merchant clients that first time discovery of the JavaScript that's out there. For some, it's been a real eye opener to see just how much is out there. You don't realize, especially as a consumer, you're just going through the site buying something, but there's a lot going on underneath the hood. It's almost kind of like if you've run your authenticated scan for the first time, you might be surprised by your results.
For sure. So we'll talk about the various levers to improving, to where to think about how you can improve your process and get to better results. So first off, evolving architecture. So we talked a little bit about this, right? So if you have a single page application, then splitting out that checkout page. In general, for these architectural improvements, it's kind of a daunting task in the beginning to make all these changes and have your developers spend very expensive developer time on, I guess, non-functional requirements, but on the security and compliance end, they'll come back and thank you in the end. So that's splitting your SPA, your single page application. Wherever you can, right, opt to not collect the data yourself in your own fields, but use a payment service provider there, a tokenization provider there, within a secure iframe, so that you're more distant and you have sort of these separate trusted environments that we talked about. To the extent possible, switch your embedding, redirecting mechanism, so that, again, that's driven off of a tag or a link in the HTML and not a script that is doing that, so that will, again, be more secure. And finally, of course, the fewer scripts on there, the less attack surface you have to worry about. So to the extent that you can, make that environment as small as you can and running as few scripts as you can, really what your business absolutely needs in order to close that sale in the end on that important checkout page. Next, deploying a tool. So for obvious reasons, that one's the most near and dear to my heart. Owning a tool like this at Human Security. Don't have time to go into all these, but maybe a good opportunity to just take a picture, because between us and some of the other vendors and some of the do-it-yourself options, there are a lot of these various options out there. Just trying to understand, when you're talking to a vendor, roughly in which they fall, could just be helpful to understanding the landscape. From kind of on the left side, the more DIY, sort of free, but is it really free type options, all the way to the most sophisticated on the right, that allows you to go a lot more beyond compliance and really actually get true security on top of it. How to think about when you're evaluating a tool. So when we look at RFCs, usually it's very much the can you inventory scripts, like almost taken directly out of the standard. But there's a lot of other things that you're going to want to think about that sort of highlighted some of these, right? You're going to want a tool that's a one-stop shop, so you don't have to like mix and match a bunch of different tools. You're going to want to think about total cost of ownership. So yeah, CSP and SRI are free, but if you need a whole team 100% of their time to just keep that up and manage that effectively and everything, then maybe not quite as worth it versus spending a little more on a tool, but that then you have one or two people spend a couple hours a week and that's it. And lastly, balancing security with business needs, right? So of course, I don't know, shutting down the whole payment page every time there's like a new script that appears, like it may sound great security-wise, and probably your QSA isn't going to take issue with that, right? But it's just very hard to operate a business that way. And PCI doesn't expect you to operate a business that way. So think a little bit about those trade-offs that some of the tools kind of force you to make or assume you're going to make. Instead, you want to kind of be able to set that sliding scale where you're most comfortable.
In terms of preparing, some of us have been through that first assessment already, since this has been the law of the land since April 1st. But if you haven't been around to that time yet, it's important to think strategically, and this is a multidisciplined exercise very often in organizations, and especially might be involving other organizations, these other third-party service providers. There's the paper side of the PCI assessment, making sure you have your policies and procedures updated to reflect that you've got these new tools in place that are doing new things. I've been doing assessments for 20 years, and we've seen many companies over the years be breached, and we find out that they had the tools in place, and the right alerts were happening, and the right bells and whistles were going off, but they didn't really have processes in place to respond to them and do something with them. So this is just as an important part of the process as dropping the tool in place, is having the processes in place that are backed up by policies that say you're going to do this, so that you have a way to respond when there is an anomaly or something goes wrong or appears to go wrong, which is what these tools are trying to detect and prevent in the first place.
Awesome, and let's talk about a little bit about those processes and how to improve those a little bit, right? So you have the opportunity now, maybe by your next assessment or even before your first one, tighten some of those processes, right? Things to think about, right? Your inventory has to stay live all the time. This isn't a once-a-year exercise before your audit. Let's figure out what scripts are running and make sure we have that list for the assessor. But instead, right, you have something that's live, that's dynamic, that constantly catches new scripts on there, because scripts and the client side in general is extremely dynamic. And then obviously maintain and keep up with the justifications and authorizations. With those, you can think about taking a more of a risk-based approach, right? So your payment service provider who provided you with an AOC and sort of ticked all the boxes, maybe you can automate authorizations of any changes that they make, and then unknown vendors that pop up, or some of the marketing vendors that sort of bypassed everything because the CMO is very strong in the org, et cetera. Those are ones where you're going to want to review every change very carefully. So have some of that built into your process. Most of the time, or I'd say at least half the changes are foreseeable, and it's a new vendor that somebody in the org contracted with. So make sure when you align all those people to the previous slide, right, they all know each other, and you have a process in place to notify people that, hey, we're starting a new proof of concept with a vendor who deploys as a JavaScript. So like FYI, look out for this thing, and here's kind of all their paperwork and everything we put them through, so that then when a tool like ours tells you, hey, you got this new script on the inventory from such and such vendor, here's everything that it's doing, then it's not a fire drill, but instead it's, okay, we knew this, they were coming, let's see what they're doing, does this like roughly align, does everything look all right? And of course makes it a lot easier on the whole organization. And then lastly, right, the more you can automate, the better. So it sort of goes to people's risk appetite and what your QSA will allow you to do. But if you have various controls in places like AOCs from trusted vendors, some vendors are comfortable with even their first-party scripts, auto-authorizing those. We don't judge. We're the tool to kind of make whatever your strategy is successful. But to that extent, you can put in place a policy that says, okay, for this specific vendor, just auto-authorize all the changes, so they all still, you're recording them and everything, but the authorization and the rationale for it is recorded. And then integrating with other tools, because it's all a team sport. So if your company uses Jira, you're going to want to open Jira tickets whenever there's anybody who wants to review something. You don't have to go into Jira and do that manually. You want the tool to be able to do that automatically. And then ideally, not everybody in the org, especially in a large org, you want to have them access all your security tools. Maybe they can get the information they need within Jira, review it over there, authorize over there, and have that feedback into the tool automatically, and all, of course, properly recorded. Some ways to think about automating. Of course, if you automate some blocking and mitigation policies on top of that, then it should make you more comfortable also auto-authorizing changes, because you know that you have policies and protections in place to block some of the worst behavior possible if you do miss something as part of your review and authorization.
Again, prepping for the assessment, putting the paperwork in order on the front end, making sure the mechanisms are in place, test them, make sure that you have the response capability built back on the back end, because you're putting this stuff in to catch stuff happening and going wrong. So it's a holistic approach, not just dropping a tool in place. Let's go ahead and advance. We're pretty much out of time, so we want to thank you. We're going to be around if you have questions. Good luck. Thank you.
Please come see us at our booth. We're also co-hosting a happy hour tonight at the restaurant in the Sheraton, together with also TCT and Johnson.
Because nothing says drink like PCI. Thank you.
See you there. Thank you.